good morning. Those of you who have decided to be able to join us, I apologize for this little bit of delay. I was waiting to see if Uncle and Auntie would be able to join us. I'm trying to be able to call them. I'm not able to get them on the phone. Um, but we'll hopefully try as we go on. But let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Our gracious Father in heaven, we want to thank you for this privilege that we have to be able to call on your name any hour of the day and night and find you available for us. There are many things, dear Lord, that we desire to be able to see, to recognize, to understand, even in the situations of this world. But we have our preconceived ideas and certain personal convictions of our own, dear Lord, that would inhibit us from recognizing your hand in dwelling in all these things that are taking place around us. I pray that you would touch our thoughts and our minds, that we would be able to recognize the true King of the North, who is Jesus Christ, seated upon the throne of the right hand of in majesty and glory. We ask you that you would help us to see that our eyes are fixed upon him. And while we recognize the events that are taking place around us, help us to remember that our redemption draweth nigh through it all. Thank you for those that are here. Be with those that are having technical difficulties, and help us so that we could be able to have them come on without any issues. Once again, thanking you now for hearing our prayers and blessing and keeping our study today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'm wondering if you guys can call them, because I cannot be able to reach them now.
Yeah, I'll call them otherwise.
Yeah, our study today is not going to be too long. We want to be able to look at a lot of the narrative involved in bringing about this transformation of power into the King of the North. We're continuing to be able to look at Daniel chapter 11 as the final vision. Of course, we said that this particular vision began in Daniel chapter 10, and earlier on, where we see that there are issues with the interpretation of these particular prophecies. In fact, if you looked at Uriah Smith's material, he calls it the literal prophecy. In fact, I think that's in one of his editions of his many revised editions of Understanding Daniel and Revelation, which is a verse by verse study in the books of Daniel and Revelation, which I think is very relevant. And this is, I think, the contention that there is in the world today, the Christian world today, as well as among scholarly circles of those who study the Bible, and also amongst those who are in Adventism as well, that we are confused whether this is a literal prophecy or is this a figurative prophecy. Obviously, in the beginning, since it's a literal description of events that take place, we will see, recognize, and understand that as the prophecy continues to be able to build, it still is, whether it still is a literal prophecy towards the end of that particular chapter in chapter 11 or not. So as you're studying this, please recognize that the reason that the Lord is showing us these prophecies is not only just to give us the historical narrative, but to be able to develop the King of the North. And for us, we need to recognize that Rome fulfills the vision. Rome establishes the vision, and that's what we're going to look at today, right? And if I can be able to share my screen with you, you should be able to appreciate some of the lessons that we would like to be able to see from history, right? So hopefully you are able to view my screen, and as we start to be able to look at these prophetic parallels, let's look at them from the historical narrative that is given for us from the book Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, the King of the North versus the King of the South. Now, a little bit of a past by way of a review, we recognize that as we read verses 1 onwards and we spent our time looking at this, we know that it was this particular prophecy that came in to Daniel was something that was shown to him during the first year of Darius the Mede. All right, we know that this was before the beginning between Darius and the Medes and the Persians. You find that before the rise of the kings of Persia. All right, so Darius the Mede was strengthened and counseled to be able to continue to, and impressed actually to be able to continue on with the fulfillment of the prophecies to be able to let Israel go free. All right, the decrees that were made essentially was to be able to help them to be able to go, and God was actually involved in that. We find that angel Gabriel is the one who was in this conversation, and then he shows Daniel the things that would shortly come to pass. He says there are 3 kings yet in Persia that will stand up. The fourth shall be far greater than them all. By his strength, though through his riches shall he stir up all against the realm of Greece. Right? We found that during this period of time, Darius was dead. Cyrus was now reigning. The 3 kings that would stand up in Persia would be successors to Cyrus. All right? Cambyses was the son of Cyrus. After him was Smerdis, who was an impostor. Right? Darius Hystapes was the 3rd king, the 3 kings of the Persian succession. Right? Now the 4th king, we studied about this, was Xerxes, the son of Darius. Right? And he was determined to conquer the Greeks, was organizing a huge, massive army of almost 5 million, more than 5 million men. And then he enlisted Carthage to be able to take care of Greece and fight against them in Thermopylae. Right, and I think this was the largest massive endeavor to be able to put such a marvelous show of force. I believe it was told that Xerxes wept that he said within 100 years these more than 5.5 million men would not be alive to continue to be able to carry on the Persian Empire. But you find that history tells us there are many movies that are made about the 300 Spartans who held the pass that supposedly prevented Xerxes from carrying out his agenda. But Xerxes eventually was conquered at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC by the Grecians. All right. Verse number 3 of Daniel chapter 11 tells us that a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion, do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and divided to the 4 winds of heaven. And not his posterity, and not to his posterity, not according to the dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others besides those. Now we recognize that this mighty king that stands was Alexander the Great, became the absolute lord of the Persian Empire, and that's when it is that his empire, that his ambitious desire to be able to control the then known world was actually launched after he conquered the Persian Empire. He was able to be the lord of the Persian Empire, but not the lord of his passions. We find that he died of a drunken debauchery in 323 BC. Right? The Grecian Empire did not go to Alexander's sons, as according to the verse that we saw, and as the history that we have studied in the past, but was divided rather unevenly to his 4 leading but warring generals. Ptolemy, one of his generals, controlled Libya, Egypt, Arabia, Syria, and even Palestine at one period of time. Cassander got Macedon and Greece. Lysimachus got Thrace, Bithynia, Hellespont, and beyond. All right, and Seleucus got all of the rest. And Seleucus was the king that controlled mostly the areas closer to India. Right. So verse number 5 then tells us that the king of the south shall be strong, one of his princes, and one of his princes. And he shall be strong above him, have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Now, Alexander's empire, we said, was divided into first four, but then essentially was broken up into just two, the north and the south, relative to Palestine or Israel. Now, like we said, there are many other nations that were in existence during this period of time. There was the Indus Valley under the Mauryan power, and then there was the Chinese civilization. There was all these other civilizations that were cradled in the world at that particular period of time. But all these prophecies that we're looking at is a relative to God's people or to Israel. Now, the successors of Cassander were conquered by Lysimachus. Thus, Greece and Macedon was annexed to Thrace. All right, so that was going on the west. Lysimachus was in turn conquered by Seleucus on the east, bringing Macedon, Thrace under Syria in the north. And then Ptolemy Soter annexed Cyprus, Phoenicia, Caria, Cyrene, and many other islands and cities, enlarging the borders of Egypt in the south. So essentially, you'd find that those nations that conquered the north became the king who conquered the north became the king of the north, and those who were annexed by Ptolemy eventually became the king of the south, where he controlled Egypt. Right? Hopefully, we have seen this enough for us to be able to recognize. So I'm just going to press forward in the narrative that is given to us about the historical nature of this alliance or this overthrow of powers. And that's what we're going to be able to look at for the next couple of minutes that we are together this morning. Verse 6 of Daniel chapter 11 says, "And in the end of years they shall join themselves together," talking about the king of the north and king of the south. Remember, we said that powers now were defined for us. And so hereafter, they're going to be defined between the north and the south. And you'll see those words used there. And this is literally the north and the south of Israel. It may not be exactly geographically to the south and towards the north, but it is more towards the southwest and the northeast. All right, hopefully you'll get to be able to see this. As Babylon, whoever controls Babylon was the king of the north, and whoever controlled Egypt was the king of the south. And hopefully these phrases will remain in our mind, as they're pretty relevant. "For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengtheneth her in these times." Now, Uriah Smith has something interesting to be able to talk about this. He says there were frequent wars between the kings of Egypt and Syria, the king of the north, king of the south. Okay, especially was this the case with Ptolemy Philadelphus, the second king of Egypt, and Antiochus Theos, the third king of Syria. They at length agreed to make peace upon condition that Antiochus should put away his former wife, Laudes, and her two sons, and should marry Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy Philadelphus. Now that's what that king's daughter of the south and the king of the north, who makes that alliance, was the bargaining chip. Ptolemy accordingly brought his daughter to Antiochus, bestowing with her such an immense amount of dowry. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, that is, her interest in the power with Antiochus. So it proved, for shortly afterwards Antiochus brought back to the court his former wife Laudes and her children. Then says the prophecy, neither shall he, that is Antiochus, stand, nor his arm, nor his posterity. Laodice, being restored to favor and power, feared lest in the fickleness of his temper Antiochus should again disgrace her by recalling Bernice. Concluding that nothing short of his death would be effectually a safeguard against such a contingency, she caused him to be poisoned shortly afterward. Neither did his children by Bernice succeed him in the kingdom, for Laudes so managed affairs as to obtain the throne for her eldest son Seleucus Callinicus. Now, this sounds like something that we would be able to watch on either Hollywood or Bollywood, but nevertheless, this was true history that was being played out. But she, that is Bernice, shall be given up. Laudes, not content with poisoning her husband Antiochus, caused Bernice and her infant son to be murdered. They then brought her, right? All the Egyptian women and attendants in endeavoring to defend Bernice were also slain with her. He that begat her, the margin when he's talking about the son of Bernice, whom she brought forth. Instead, when they said that he that begat her, is talking about essentially the child of Bernice, her son who was murdered at the same time by the order of Laodice. He that strengtheneth her in these times was doubtless her husband Antiochus, or those who took her part and defended her also were destroyed during this ensue of power, right? But out of a branch of her roots, one shall stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their guards with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north, and so shall the king of the south come into the kingdom, and shall return into his own land. Now I find this narrative as well pretty interesting. Let's look at what has been recorded for us in history. It says the branch out of the same root with Bernice was her brother Ptolemy Euergetes. Now, that Euergetes was a title that was given to him. We will look at that in a moment. He had no sooner succeeded his father Ptolemy Philadelphus in the kingdom of Egypt. Remember, all the Ptolemies were in the south. Then, burning to avenge the death of his sister Bernice, he raised up an immense army and invaded the territory of the kingdom of the north. That was specifically Seleucus Callinicus, right, who with his mother Laodice was reigning now in Syria. He prevailed against them even to the conquering of Syria, Cilicia, and the upper part of Euphrates and eastward to Babylon. But hearing that there was a sedition that was raised up in Egypt, required him to return home. Right now, the prophecy said that he shall not continue to be able to be there. He would return back to his own place. He plundered the kingdom of Seleucus by taking 40,000 talents of silver and precious vessels and 2,500 images of these guards. Right, so the prophecy did say that he was going to be able to take away the precious stones, precious vessels of silver and gold, and he should also take away their guards. Among these were the images which Cambyses had formerly taken from Egypt and carried into Persia. The Egyptians, being wholly given to idolatry, bestowed upon Ptolemy the title Euergetes, or the benefactor, as a compliment for restoring their captive guards after many years. Right? There are authors still extant, says Thomas Newton, who confirmed several of the same particulars. Appian informs us that Laodice, having killed Antiochus and after him both Bernice and her child, Ptolemy, the son of Philadelphus, to revenge the murders. These murders invaded Syria. Now, these are historical narratives that are recorded for us. I thought that we should be able to see that as well. So, Ptolemy, the son of Philadelphus, to revenge the murders, invaded Syria, slew Laodice, and proceeded as far as Babylon. From Polybus, we learn that Ptolemy, surnamed Euergetes, being greatly incensed at the cruel treatment of his sister Bernice, marched into Syria with an army and took the city of Seleucia, which was kept for some years afterwards as the garrison for the kings of Egypt. Thus he did enter the fortress of the king of the north. Okay, Polyaenus affirms that Ptolemy made himself master of the country from Mount Taurus as far east as to India without war or battle, because he obviously conquered the borders right there. But he ascribed it by mistake to his father instead of the son. Justin asserts that if Ptolemy had not been recalled by a domestic sedition in Egypt, he would have possessed the whole kingdom of Seleucus. So the king of the south came into the kingdom of the north, and then of course he returned back to his own land. He continues for more time than the king of the north, for Seleucus Callinicus died in exile as he fell from a horse, and Ptolemy survived him by 4 or 5 years. Again, a fulfillment of that prophecy that says that he shall continue more years than the king of the north. All right, just going on. Verse number 10 of Daniel chapter 11 says, "But his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through, and then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress." Still talking between this king of the north and the king of the south. The kings of Seleucus Callinicus were Seleucus Soranus and Antiochus Magnus. All right, now it says that his son shall be stirred up. Both of these sons were to be able to enter the work of vindicating and avenging the cause of the father and their country. The elder of these, Seleucus, who first took the throne, he assembled a great multitude to recover his father's dominion, but was poisoned by his own generals after a short and inglorious reign. His more capable brother, Antiochus Magnus, was thereupon proclaimed as king. All right, now we will read about Magnus in history. He took charge of the army, recovered Seleucia and Syria, made himself master of some places by treaty and others by force of arms. Antiochus overcame Nicholas, the Egyptian general, in battle and had thoughts of invading Egypt itself. However, a truce followed, wherein both sides treated for peace, yet prepared for war. Here is the one who should certainly overflow and pass over. And I want you to keep those words in your mind, because as you go through Daniel chapter 11, you're going to see the words overflow and pass through mentioned several times about the king of the north, all right, and not just with the Syrian kings, but also talking about the kings that will come after Syria. All right. Ptolemy Philopator succeeds his father Eucrates in the kingdom of Egypt. I know there's a lot of history that we're looking at, but this is what the scriptures are actually showing us. Being advanced to the crown not long after Antiochus Magnus had succeeded his brother in the government of Syria. He was an ease-loving and vicious prince, but at length, aroused at the prospect of an invasion of Egypt by Antiochus, he was indeed moved with choler. All right, and that's the phrase that is used in verse number 11. It says that the king of the south shall move with choler and shall come forth and fight with him, even to the king of the north. He shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. Talking about how he marshals a large army to check the progress of the Syrian king, but the king of the north was also to be set forth as a great multitude. The army of Antiochus, according to Polybius, amounted to 62,000 footmen, 6,000 horsemen, 102 elephants, which is a large number to be able to mobilize. In this conflict, the Battle of Raphia, Antiochus was defeated with nearly 14,000 soldiers slain, 4,000 taken prisoners, and his army was given into the hands of the king of the south as a fulfillment of the prophecy. So we see this change of power and control between the king of the north and the king of the south. And then verse number 12 of Daniel 11 says, "And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it." Now let's take a look and see that Ptolemy lacked the prudence to make good use of this victory. Had he followed up his success, he probably would have become master of the whole kingdom of Antiochus. But there was a prophecy in play, and God was in control of all that happened. But after making only a few threats, he made peace that he might be able to give himself uninterrupted and uncontrolled to his brutish passions. Having thus conquered his enemies, he was overcome by his own vices, and forgetful of the great name by which he might have been established, he spent his time in feasting and sensuality. His heart was lifted up by his success, but he was far from being strengthened by it. For the inglorious use he made of it caused his own subjects to rebel against him. By the lifting up of his heart was specially made manifest in his transaction with the Jews. You find that Antiochus Magnus has been considered by many as to be the Antichrist power because of this particular act. Right now, of course, we don't realize that when we say that, we are taking away from the true Antichrist power, which is Rome. And we will see how Rome fulfills this vision in just a moment. Coming to Jerusalem, he offered sacrifices and was desirous of entering into the most holy place of the temple, contrary to the law and the religion of the Jews. But being restrained with great difficulty, he left the place burning with anger against the whole nation of the Jews. He wanted to be able to go into the temple and offer the sacrifice. Right? History says that he probably tried to be able to offer, I think, the pig, I think, on the altar. But that again is something that can be able to be referred to and verified. So he, being very upset, left, burnt against the whole nation of the Jews in anger, and then determined to be able to vet out his persecution of the Jews relentlessly. In Alexandria, where the Jews had resided since the days of Alexander, enjoying the privileges of the most favored citizens, 40,000 according to Eusebius, and also 60,000 maybe, by contrast by Jerome, says that he had killed that many of the Jews. The rebellion of the Egyptians and the massacre of the Jews certainly were not calculated to strengthen Ptolemy in his kingdom, but rather to be able to suffer a total annihilation. Right? Let's look at verse number 13. We'll come back and we'll look at the king of the north with regard to the change of guard and change of power. But looking at now the breakdown of this particular relationship between Ptolemy's and Seleucian empires. For the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. The events predicted in these verses were to occur after certain years. The peace that concluded between Ptolemy Philopator and Antiochus Magnus lasted for 14 years. Meanwhile, Ptolemy died of intemperance and debauchery and is succeeded by his son Ptolemy Epiphanes, who was then only 5 years old. Now keep this in mind. Antiochus suppressed rebellion in his kingdom during this time, reduced the eastern provinces to obedience. He was then at leisure for any enterprise when the young Epiphanes would be able to come to the throne of Egypt. Thinking that this was too good an opportunity to enlarge his dominion let slip, he raised an immense army greater than the former and set out against Egypt, expecting to have an easy victory over the infant king. But then there was another group of people that were looking over their shoulders. Verse number 14 says, "In those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall." Okay. Antiochus Magnus was not the only one who rose up against the infant Ptolemy. Agathocles was his prime minister, having possession of the king's person, conducting the affairs of the kingdom in his stead, was so dissolute and proud in the exercise of his power that the provinces which were before held in subject rebelled. Egypt itself was disturbed by seditions, and the Alexandrians raised up against Agathocles. Caused him, his sister, his mother, his associates to be put to death. At the same time, Philip of Macedon entered into league with Antiochus to divide the dominions of Ptolemy between them. each proposing to take parts uh, which lay nearest and convenient to them. Here was a rising up against the king of the south sufficient to fulfill the prophecy, and it resulted beyond doubt in the exact events which the prophecy forecasted. A new power is now introduced. Okay? The power is introduced by calling them the robbers of thy people. Literally, says Thomas Newton, the sons of breakers of thy people. Now, the word robbers would be someone who breaks in, okay, as the English language should be able to show. So he calls them sons of breakers. Far away on the banks of the Tiber, a kingdom had been nourishing ambitious projects and dark design. They were small and weak at first. It grew in strength and vigor with marvelous rapidity, reaching out cautiously here and there to try its prowess and test its warlike arm, until with consciousness of its power, it boldly reared its head among the nations of the earth, and seized with invincible hand the helm of affairs. Henceforth, the name of Rome stands upon the page of history, destined for long ages to control the world and to exert a mighty influence among the nations, even to the end of time. Right? You notice that this is what it is that we understand today will be a fulfillment of the king of the north. Rome comes to be able to establish the vision. Why is Rome called the robbers of the people? Was it because they tried to be able to not only break people down physically by their iron will and their iron arm, or did they also try to be able to change people's religious persuasion by bringing in new doctrines that was an amalgamation of the previous generations as well? So Rome spoke, Syria, Macedon soon found a change coming over them in the aspect of their dreams. Right? So, in my final text today that we will look at, Rome interferes in behalf of the young king of Egypt. Remember that infant king determined that he should be protected from the ruin devised by Antiochus and Philip. This was about 200 BC and was one of the first important interferences of Rome in the affairs of Syria and Egypt. Roland furnishes the following account on this about this matter. Antiochus, king of Syria, Philip, king of Macedon, during the reign of Ptolemy Philopator, had discovered the strong zeal for the interest of that monarch and were ready to assist him on all occasions. Yet no sooner was he dead, leaving behind him an infant, talking about that infant king, whom the laws of humanity and justice enjoined them not to disturb in the possession of his father's kingdom, then they immediately joined in a criminal alliance and excite each other to take off the lawful heir and divide his dominion between them. Philip was to have Syria, Libya, Cyrenicia, and Egypt, and Antiochus, all of the rest. With this view, the later ended the Kilo Syria or even Palestine areas in less than 2 campaigns and made an entire conquest of these 2 provinces. Just so that we understand that people who wanted to be able to gut the kingdom of this infant king was to have done so when he did not have the ability or the power to be able to control it. So his own generals, his own prime minister was the one who had a hand in doing this. So in just skipping down, all right, just a couple of sentences, he says, the one will be tempted, continues the same author, to see at seeing the most sacred laws of society so openly violated, to accuse providence of being indifferent and insensible to the most horrid crimes. How many people have said today that God is insensitive to all the evil that is happening? But God controls the pulse of even the world, even amongst the people who do not acknowledge Him as the Lord of their lives. But it fully justified its conduct in by punishing those 2 kings according to their deserts. But made such an example of them as ought in all succeeding ages to deter others from following their example. For whilst they are meditating to dispose a weak and helpless infant of his kingdom by piecemeal, Providence raised up the Romans against them, who entirely subverted the kingdom of Philip and Antiochus and reduced their successors to almost as great calamities as those that they intended to crush the infant king. All right, so Rome, to establish the vision, Rome was more than any of the other people as the subject. The Romans, more than any of the other people, are the subject of Daniel's prophecies. Right, so Rome is the focus of the whole prophecy leading up to Rome. That's what we said earlier. All that we are studying about in these prophecies leads us to the end of time. Rome is the focus of the Antichrist power. Right now, of course, we're not talking about pagan Rome like this instance here, but papal Rome. Their first interference in the affairs of these kingdoms is referred to as being established, or a demonstration of the truth of the vision which predicted the existence of such a power. But they shall fall, the Bible says, is referred to by some as being the first part of this verse, who would stand up against the king of the south. Others refer to the robbers of Daniel's people, the Romans. In this, which is either the case, you find that Ptolemy is set to fall, and his regions as well. So you find, as we continue to be able to read, we'll find how Cleopatra comes in the scene, and the generals of Rome who, with the Caesars and with Marcus Antony and everyone else who plays a significant role in later verses, we will see and understand how Rome fulfills this particular vision. Right? So that we see and we recognize. There's a lot of build up between the old guard and the new guard. There's always the rise of certain powers. One thing that is clear from the scriptures is that God is still in control. Right? While nations rise and was to be able to try to use their manipulative design to gain supremacy, he still has his hand on the pulse of things. So as we spend this time in studying about the history of the nations of the world, we need to be able to, as we look back at those histories, recognize the hand of God in the rise and the fall of nations, as well as in the setting up of kings and in dethroning men according to the debased attitudes and ambitious desires of their heart. So if God was to be able to still be in control of people's lives and history that has gone by, he can definitely take control of our lives today as well. Right? So as far as the historical narrative up till verse 14, we have been able to establish between the king of the north and the king of the south that eventually the kingdom of Greece will come to an end in these few verses that's remaining, and now Rome begins to be able to take on the scene as the king of the north. All right, and we will see how Rome establishes the vision, but Rome protects the king of the south and then eventually brings them underfoot as well. And Rome now establishes the entire vision, but Rome has become the power to contend with even until the end of the world. And we will see how Rome now changes in its guard as well. But the king of the north, until the end of the particular prophecy, now remains as Rome, whether it's pagan or it becomes in its religious form papal as well. You will still see Rome till the end of time, end of that particular prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 and even the beginning of Daniel chapter 12. But just so that we recognize and we understand that the king of the south would be Egypt still, but still we will see as to how the game continues to be able to play out as we study these histories together. So as of always, we hope that I know a lot of it was a lot of historical facts, and I would rather have read that to you than to be able to have given you my interpretation of the thing than to be able to just read you history during these particular verses that the Bible actually told many years before it even took place, so that we recognize and we understand. As we're looking back, we to see and we recognize that. But as of always, we hope that your minds have been enlightened as we tasted a little bit of this honey, and that the Word of God has enthralled us to be able to study more about what God desires to do for us in our personal homes and our lives as well. So let's close with a word of prayer. Our gracious Father in heaven, there are many things of history that we need to be able to learn from, but one thing is clear, dear Lord, that you are still in control of all that happens. We are grateful for the rise and the fall of many nations, but help us so that we can be able to place our trust and our faith upon you. And that as we see your hand move upon the nations of this world, you have given us these signs of the rise and the fall of nations for us to recognize that you rule over all and that you are about soon to make a short end of this world's history. I ask you once again that you would be with each home, and I pray that the confidence we get in the study of your word would be an encouragement to us to take you at your word and trust and believe in your promises in us. And I thank you, dear Lord, that your word can be established as the sure foundation for our feet. Thank you for hearing and answering our prayers before we have asked. In Jesus' most sweetest name we pray. Amen. Right. Thank you for being here. God bless you and your home and your family, and